Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the rules that we apply when multiplying and dividing integers. But before we start those rules, let's quickly review the rules that we apply when adding and subtracting integers. When adding integers, a positive 3 plus a positive 2 equals a positive 5. That's because the rule says when the signs are the same, we add the integers and keep the sign. These two signs are the same, we add our integers and we bring over our sign. The same is true if you're adding negative integers. Negative 3 plus negative 2 equals negative 5. We've simply added our integers and we've carried over our common sign. Now the rule says that if the signs are different, then we're going to subtract and keep the sign of the number with the largest absolute value. For example, negative 8 plus a positive 2 equals negative 6. We simply subtracted the 2 from 8. 8 is the number with the highest value. Its sign is negative. That's the sign that carries into our answer. Let's quickly review the rules that apply when subtracting. So rule number 1 says we keep the sign of the first number in the problem. The second rule says we change the subtraction sign to a positive sign. The third part of the rule says we change the sign of the number behind the subtraction sign to its opposite, and then we apply the rule for adding integers. Let's quickly take a look at this. Negative 7 minus negative 4 equals negative 3. So what we've done here, we're going to keep this sign from the first number. We're going to change our subtraction sign to a addition sign, and then we're going to change the sign behind our subtraction sign to its opposite. In this case we have negative 4. We're going to change it to a positive 4. And now we're going to apply the rule for adding integers. We have opposite signs, so we're going to subtract the 4 out of the 7. That's going to result in 3. And number 7 is the highest absolute value, so it's going to keep its sign, and that's going to be the sign in our product. All right, now that we've reviewed those rules, let's look at the rules for multiplying integers. Rule number 1 says the product of a positive integer and a negative integer is negative. For example, positive 4 times negative 2 equals negative 8. Because the rule said the product of a positive integer and a negative integer is going to be negative. Rule number 2 says the product of two positive integers is going to be positive. So plus 6 times positive 8 equals positive 48. Again, the rule says that two positive integers will result in a positive product. Positive 6, positive 8, positive 48. Rule number 3 says the product of two negative integers is always positive. For example, negative 6 times negative 8 equals positive 48, or negative 2 times negative 4 equals a positive 8. Because again, the rule says the product of two negative integers is going to be positive. Now let's take a quick look at the rules of division. When dividing integers, the quotient rule number 1 says the quotient of a positive integer and a negative integer is going to be negative. For example, negative 8 divided by positive 4 equals negative 2, because the rule says the quotient of a positive integer and a negative integer is going to result in a negative quotient. Rule number 2 says the quotient of two positive integers is always positive. For example, positive 9 divided by positive 3 equals positive 3. Also, positive 16 divided by positive 4 equals a positive 4, because again, the rule says the quotient of two positive integers is always positive. Rule number 3 says the quotient of two negative integers is also always positive. For example, negative 6 divided by negative 2 equals positive 3. Or negative 42 divided by negative 7 equals positive 6. Because again, the rule says the quotient of two negative integers is always positive. In summary, what you can say is, if the signs are different, the answer is negative. If the signs are the same, the answer is positive. That's our lesson on multiplication and division of integers. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.